June 10, 1944. Outside Corentin, Normandy, the rain has not stopped for 2 days. Mud clings to boots, to tires, to everything that tries to move across the hedgerow-choked countryside. Hauptmann Karl Weiss wipes his gloves against his coat, smearing wet earth across already darkened wool. Around him, the remnants of his company huddle behind a sunken lane, rifles angled toward a gap in the hedges where American infantry had last been spotted. The air smells of damp soil, cordite, and crushed leaves. Where are they coming from? One of his sergeants mutters, peering through binoculars fogged by the cold. Weiss doesn't answer immediately. He is staring at something else. A map, not his own. His own map lies folded in his satchel, a creased, fading pre-war survey sheet that shows only main roads, a few villages, and vague contour lines. No, this one is different. This one lies open on the ground before him, taken from a dead American lieutenant less than an hour ago. Weiss kneels. The paper is thick, waxed against moisture. The ink is sharp. Precise. Every hedgerow is there, every narrow farm track, every drainage ditch, every orchard boundary, drawn with meticulous care. Even individual buildings are marked, some labeled with small notations: stone barn, wooden structure, possible observation point. His jaw tightens. This is impossible. He traces a gloved finger along a thin path that does not exist on his own map, a path that, moments earlier, an American squad had used to flank his position. They knew, Weiss whispers. They knew exactly where to move. Behind him, a burst of machine gun fire crackles, followed by the distant thud of artillery. But for a moment, the battlefield noise fades beneath a more unsettling realization: this is not luck, this is preparation. Across Normandy, similar scenes are unfolding. German officers, seasoned men who have fought from Poland to Russia, are encountering something they cannot easily explain. Their opponents are not just advancing. They are navigating with uncanny precision. Lieutenant Otto Kramer, positioned near St. Lo, experiences it firsthand. Left flank. They're coming through the orchard, a soldier shouts. Kramer turns sharply. Impossible. There is no passage there. But there is. American infantry emerge between rows of apple trees, moving confidently, as if they have rehearsed this exact approach. They do not hesitate. They do not probe blindly. They advance with certainty. Later, when the position is overrun, Kramer finds the answer among the scattered gear left behind. Another map, more detailed than anything he has ever seen. It shows not just the orchard, but the spacing of the trees. The German army, for all its early war efficiency, has begun to feel the strain of years of conflict. Maps are reused, revised hastily, sometimes copied from outdated civilian surveys. Entire regions, especially in Western Europe, are represented with frustrating gaps, but the Allies, they seem to possess something else entirely, something industrial, something relentless. In a quiet farmhouse miles behind the front, Oberstleutnant Friedrich Heller studies reports arriving from multiple units. He reads them one by one, his expression growing darker. Enemy maneuver through uncharted terrain, unexpected approach via minor road not indicated on issued maps, captured documents. Reveal highly detailed cartographic materials. He sets the papers down. This is coordinated, he says to his adjutant. Not coincidence. Not improvisation. The adjutant hesitates. Herr Oberstleutnant, are you suggesting they have better maps than we do? Heller looks up, eyes sharp. I am suggesting, he replies slowly, that they have maps for places we barely know exist. Outside, the rumble of distant artillery rolls across the countryside. Heller turns toward the window, staring out at the endless patchwork of fields, hedgerows, and villages. For years, Germany has relied on speed, surprise, and superior coordination, but now, the enemy seems to know the ground better than the defenders, and that changes everything. Back near Corentin, Weiss folds the captured map carefully and slips it into his coat. For the first time since the invasion began, he feels something. Unfamiliar, not fear, but doubt. If the enemy knows every path, every hedge, every hidden route, then where, exactly, can they still be stopped? The rain continues to fall, and somewhere beyond the hedgerows, American troops are already moving, guided not by guesswork, but by knowledge painstakingly gathered long before a single boot touched French soil. Weiss exhales slowly. This war, he murmurs, is no longer being fought on the battlefield alone. June 11, 1944. South of Corentin, the rain eases, but the ground remains treacherous. Hauptmann Karl Weiss stands over the hood of a Kübelwagen, the captured American map spread flat beneath a flickering field lamp. Mud drips from the edges, but the ink holds firm, crisp, unyielding. Around him, his officers gather in silence. Lieutenant Becker leans closer. Where did you get this? From a dead officer, Weiss replies. And he was not unique.
Others have seen the same. Becker studies the sheet, eyes narrowing. These markings, elevations, hedges, drainage lines, even individual trees in some places. Weiss nods once. Not guesses. Measurements. A pause, then Becker asks the question none of them want to say aloud: how? The answer lies far from Normandy. Years before this moment, before the landings, before the bombing campaigns intensified, the Allies had begun a campaign not of bombs or bullets, but of observation. In offices in London, Washington, and beyond, thousands of analysts worked in near silence. Their weapons were magnifying lenses, stereoscopic viewers, and stacks of aerial photographs. At a long table in southern England, Flight Officer James Ellison adjusts the twin eyepieces of a stereoscope. Two nearly identical photographs lie beneath it, images taken seconds apart from a reconnaissance aircraft flying high above occupied France. Through the device, the flat images rise into depth, the fields become contours, hedges become walls, roads reveal their gradients. Ellison speaks without looking up. There's a depression here. Likely a drainage ditch. Runs parallel to the hedgerow. A woman beside him, Corporal Margaret Lewis, notes it carefully onto a drafting sheet. Width: 2 meters, maybe more. Enough to conceal movement. She marks it line by line, feature by feature. The landscape is rebuilt, not as it appears casually, but as it exists tactically. Back in Normandy, Weiss taps a finger against the map. They even know which buildings are stone, he says. Which ones can withstand artillery? One of his NCOs scoffs quietly. Luck. Or captured French records. Weiss shakes his head no. This is systematic. He flips the map, revealing the legend printed in clean, standardized symbols. Everything is categorized. Everything is deliberate. These were made for war, he says. June 12, 1944. Near St. Lo, Lieutenant Otto Kramer sits in the ruins of a shattered command post. Dust floats in the air, illuminated by shafts of light breaking through the collapsed roof. In his hands, another captured map. He compares it to his own. The difference is humiliating. His German-issued sheet shows a village, just a name and a road intersection. The Allied map shows the same village as a living structure, alleys, courtyards, even small footpaths between homes. They can fight inside a place they've never seen. Kramer mutters. A runner arrives, breathless. Her lieutenant. Orders from battalion: prepare fallback positions along the ridge. Kramer nods, folding both maps, but as he rises, he hesitates. The ridge. He glances again at the American map. It marks not just the ridge, but multiple concealed approaches to it. If he can see them, then so can they. Far above Europe, the work continues. Unarmed reconnaissance aircraft, often stripped of armor to gain altitude and speed, cross hostile skies daily. Pilots fly alone or in small crews, cameras mounted where guns might otherwise be. Captain Richard Halvorsen grips the controls of his modified aircraft, the engines droning steadily as he climbs, altitude 26,000, his navigator calls out, "Hold it steady," Halvorsen replies. We get one pass. Below them, clouds part briefly. The camera shutters begin to click. Rapid. Mechanical. Precise. Each photograph captures a fragment of the continent. Individually, they mean little. Together, they become everything. In England, entire facilities are dedicated to transforming those fragments into usable intelligence. Large-scale printing presses run day and night. Draftsmen refine details by hand. Corrections are issued constantly, maps updated as new information arrives. IT is not glamorous work, but it is relentless. June 13, 1944. Normandy front. Oberstleutnant Friedrich Heller receives another report. This one is different. It includes a captured Allied document, a map annotated with unit movements, artillery ranges, and planned routes. Heller studies it carefully. They are not reacting, he says quietly. They are executing. His adjutant shifts uneasily. Herr Oberstleutnant, what does that mean for us? Heller looks up. It means, he says, we are fighting an enemy who has already walked this ground in detail before the battle even began. Outside, the sound of engines grows louder. Columns are moving again, always moving. Back at the front, Weiss returns the map to his coat. The hedgerows no longer feel like protection, they feel exposed to every concealed path, every hidden ditch. Once advantages may now be liabilities, because if the enemy has seen them first, then every ambush becomes predictable, every defense becomes fragile. He looks toward the horizon, where distant figures advance through the fields with unsettling confidence. This is not just intelligence, Weiss says under his breath, this is control. The war of bullets continues, but beneath it, a quieter war has already tipped the balance. June 15, 1944.
Southampton, England. The warehouse doors slide open with a metallic groan. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of ink and machine oil. Rows of printing presses thunder in synchronized rhythm, their rollers churning out sheet after sheet of freshly printed maps. The noise is deafening, constant, mechanical, unstoppable. Private First Class Daniel Harper stands frozen for a moment, clutching his duffel bag. "Move it, lad," a sergeant barks, waving him forward.
"You'll get used to the noise."
Harper nods quickly and steps inside. What he sees stops him again. Stacks, no, mountains of maps, they are everywhere.
Bundled, sorted, labeled by region, unit, operation.
Some are small enough to fit in a breast pocket. Others are large, folded carefully into waterproof covers. A corporal hands him a packet.
"You're 101st, right?
These are yours.
Corentin sector."
Harper takes them, flipping one open. It's the same kind of map Weiss had found. Every hedgerow, every lane, every structure, even shaded relief showing subtle rises and dips in the terrain. He looks up, stunned.
"Who made all this?" The corporal smirks faintly. "Half the war effort, that's who."
The scale of the operation is staggering. Across Britain, specialized units, cartographers, surveyors, engineers, and intelligence officers have been working for years to build an unprecedented library of terrain data. In a drafting room nearby, Lieutenant Eleanor Whitaker leans over a large table, pencil in hand. "Update this section," she says, pointing to a cluster of buildings.
"Latest reconnaissance shows 2 additional outbuildings here. Likely storage."
A junior draftsman nods and begins to adjust the drawing. Whitaker straightens, rubbing her eyes. "How many revisions is that now?" he asks. She exhales.
"For this sheet? 12. And it's final?" She gives him a tired look. "Nothing is final." June 16, 1944.
Normandy. Hauptmann Karl Weiss studies his surroundings with new suspicion. The hedgerows are no longer just obstacles, they are lines on a map, lines the enemy already understands. "Shift the machine gun position," he orders abruptly. Becker looks confused.
"Herr Hauptmann?" 10 meters back.
"There's a drainage ditch here."
Weiss taps his temple. "I saw it on their map. If they know it, they'll use it."
The men move quickly. Minutes later, American riflemen appear exactly where Weiss predicted, emerging from the concealed ditch, advancing low and fast. This time, they meet prepared fire. The attack falters for a brief moment. Weiss feels a flicker of satisfaction, but it is short-lived, because the only reason he knew was because the enemy knew first. June 18, 1944. Near Saedlow, Lieutenant Otto Kramer crouches beside a battered half-track, rain dripping from his helmet. A young soldier approaches, holding something carefully. "Herr Lieutenant, you should see this."
Kramer takes it. "Another map, but this one is different. It is printed on fabric, flexible, durable,
resistant to water." He runs his fingers across it. "They expected the conditions," he murmurs.
"Rain, mud, everything." The soldier nods. "We found it on a prisoner. He said every platoon has them." Kramer looks up sharply. "Every platoon?" "Yes, Herr Lieutenant."
Kramer exhales slowly. "And not just officers, not just command units, everyone." Back in England, the distribution process is as precise as the maps themselves. Crates are labeled by division, regiment, even company. Logistics officers ensure that the right units receive the right sheets, tailored to their specific objectives. In a briefing tent, Captain Harold Green addresses a group of infantrymen. "Listen carefully," he says, holding up a map.
"This isn't just paper. This is your advantage."
He points to a narrow path. "This track here, barely visible on the ground.
But it leads behind a German position. You follow it, you avoid their line of fire."
A soldier raises a hand.
"Sir, how do we know it's accurate?" Green doesn't hesitate, "Because it's been checked. Again and again." He folds the map. "Trust it." June 19, 1944.
Normandy front. Oberstleutnant Friedrich Heller stands over a large table, multiple captured maps spread before him. Each one tells the same story: precision, consistency, depth. He turns to his adjutant.
"Our maps, when were they last updated?" The adjutant hesitates. "Some, before the war. Others revised in 42.
Heller closes his eyes briefly. "We are fighting with memory," he says quietly. He gestures to the Allied maps. "They are fighting with reality."
Outside, the front continues to shift. Villages fall if fields change hands, but beneath the movement, something more fundamental is happening. The Allies are not just advancing through France, they are navigating it with a clarity that turns uncertainty into opportunity. Back near Corentin, Weiss folds the map once more. It is no longer just a curiosity, it is a warning. Not if the enemy can see the battlefield this clearly, then every German position is already exposed, every defense already studied. He looks at his men, exhausted, mud-streaked, waiting for orders. We adapt, he says firmly. We think ahead. But even as he speaks, a question lingers in his mind. How do you outmaneuver an enemy who already knows the ground better than you ever did? The presses in England keep running, the aircraft keep flying, the maps keep improving, and with each passing day, the gap widens. June 20, 1944. 28,000 feet above northern France, the sky is a pale, endless blue. Below, the war is invisible. Captain Richard Halvorsen adjusts his oxygen mask, his breath loud and mechanical in his ears. Frost creeps along the edges of the cockpit glass, thin crystals forming delicate patterns that obscure the corners of his vision. Steady, steady, his navigator murmurs behind him. The aircraft, a stripped-down reconnaissance variant, unarmed and vulnerable, glides forward with quiet purpose. No guns. No armor. Just cameras. Halvorsen knows the risk. If they are spotted, they cannot fight back. If they are intercepted, speed and altitude are their only hope. Target area in 10 seconds. The navigator calls out. Halvorsen tightens his grip on the controls. Hold her level. Below them, the clouds break for a moment. The landscape of Normandy appears. Fields divided by hedgerows, narrow roads cutting through villages, rivers glinting faintly in the sunlight. Now the cameras activate. A rapid series of clicks fills the fuselage. Precise, relentless, mechanical. Frame after frame is captured in seconds. Each photograph overlaps the last, ensuring nothing is missed. Halvorsen keeps the aircraft perfectly steady, fighting the subtle buffeting of high-altitude winds. Keep it straight, keep it straight. Then, a flash in the distance, the navigator stiffens. Flack. 2 o'clock. Black puffs begin to bloom in the sky far below. But rising. Halvorsen doesn't react immediately. Stay on course, he says calmly. The cameras are still running. Each second matters, each image matters, because somewhere, miles away, someone will study these photographs and turn them into something far more powerful than a snapshot. They will turn them into knowledge. June 20, 1944. Luftwaffe Command Post, Western France. Oberleutnant Ernst Voigt studies a report with growing frustration. Another reconnaissance flight, he snaps. At that altitude? A radio operator nods. Yes, Herr Oberleutnant. Too high for effective interception. By the time fighters are scrambled, Voigt slams a hand against the table. They come and go as they please. He looks at the map on the wall, ironically sparse compared to what he now knows the enemy possesses. They are mapping everything, he mutters. A subordinate shifts uneasily. But Herr Oberleutnant, what can they see from that height? Voigt turns sharply. Everything that matters. Back in England, the photographs arrive within hours. At a processing facility, technicians move quickly, developing film in long, chemical baths. Images emerge slowly, ghostly at first, then sharp, revealing the terrain in astonishing clarity. A flight officer, James Ellison, receives a fresh set, Normandy sector, a clerk says, handing him the prints. Ellison nods and immediately places 2 images under his stereoscope. The world rises into 3 dimensions. He leans closer. There, he says quietly. New trench line. Recently dug. Soils lighter. Corporal Margaret Lewis peers over his shoulder. Coordinates? Ellison reads them off. She marks it onto a master map. Another small detail added, another advantage gained. June 21, 1944. Normandy front. Hauptmann Karl Weiss crouches beside a shattered wall, scanning the horizon. Something feels wrong, too quiet. Hold positions, he orders. Minutes pass, then, artillery, precise. Devastating shells land with terrifying accuracy, tearing through defensive positions, collapsing cover, forcing men to scatter. Weiss ducks as debris rains down around him. How do they? Becker shouts, but the question is lost in the thunder. The barrage shifts methodically, walking across their line, not random, not approximate, calculated. Weiss presses himself against the ground, heart pounding. They are not just guessing, they are targeting. June 22, 1944. Intelligence briefing. Allied Command Captain Harold Green stands before a group of officers, a large map pinned behind him. Red circles mark German positions, each one derived from recent aerial reconnaissance. These trench lines were identified yesterday, Green explains. Camouflage is good, but not perfect. Soil disturbance gave them away. An officer nods. And the artillery adjustments? Green taps the map. Corrected using updated imagery. We're not firing blind. He looks around the room, we see them, he says simply. June 23, 1944. German Command Sector Oberstleutnant Friedrich Heller listens as reports come in, artillery strikes, highly accurate, positions compromised shortly after establishment, enemy appears to anticipate defensive layouts. Heller says nothing for a long moment, then he speaks, they are watching us. The room falls silent, not metaphorically, literally watching, from above, from afar, relentlessly. Back in the sky, Halvorson's aircraft banks gently, leaving the target area behind. The flak fades, the tension eases slightly. Think we got enough? The navigator asks. Halvorson allows himself a small breath. We always need more, he replies, because the work is never finished. Every new trench, every new roadblock, every movement. It all must be seen, captured, understood. On the ground, Weiss looks up briefly. Shielding his eyes from the sun high above, he sees nothing. No aircraft. No sign of observation, and yet, he feels exposed. As if the battlefield itself has become transparent. As if every movement, every decision, is being recorded somewhere beyond his reach. He lowers his gaze, gripping his rifle tighter. This is no longer just a fight for territory, he says quietly. It is a fight for awareness. And in that fight, the enemy seems to hold the advantage. July 25, 1944. Near Saint-Lô, Normandy, the morning begins with a distant rumble. Hauptmann Karl Weiss hears it before he sees anything. Low, constant, unnatural. Not artillery. Not vehicles, something heavier. He steps out from beneath a camouflaged net, scanning the hazy sky, then the horizon ignites. A wall of explosions erupts in the distance, rolling forward like a storm. The ground trembles beneath his boots as shockwaves ripple through the hedgerows. Bombers, someone whispers, but this is not a raid, this is something else. Miles above, hundreds of Allied bombers move in tight formation, their shadows drifting across the patchwork fields below. They are not hunting targets of opportunity. They are striking coordinates, precisely defined, carefully calculated, coordinates that began as marks on maps. Weiss drops to the ground as the bombardment intensifies. Entire sections of the German defensive line vanish in seconds, positions that had been carefully prepared, camouflaged, reinforced, gone. When the bombing finally lifts, the silence is worse. For a moment, nothing moves, then engines, dozens. Hundreds American tanks and infantry surge forward through the shattered landscape, advancing not blindly, but along routes already chosen, already planned. Panzerfaust teams forward. Weiss shouts, scrambling to reorganize what remains of his unit, but even as his men take position, something becomes clear. The Americans are not bunching up, they are spreading out, avoiding choke points, bypassing wreckage, moving along lines that seem almost rehearsed. Weiss watches a column veer unexpectedly, cutting through a narrow gap between two ruined hedgerows. That path, Becker mutters. It's barely visible. Weiss doesn't need to check the map. He already knows. It's there, marked, July 25, 1944. Allied Forward Command Captain Harold Green studies a large operational map spread across a reinforced table. Colored lines indicate movement corridors, routes selected based on terrain analysis, reconnaissance, and weeks of preparation. An officer points to a section. Breakthrough expected here? Green nods. Terrain opens slightly. Fewer hedgerows. Better mobility for armor. And resistance? Heavy, Green replies. But we know where they are. He taps a cluster of red markings. Most of their defensive strength is concentrated here and here. We avoid that, we push through faster. The officer exhales. All this, from maps? Green allows himself a thin smile, from everything. Back at the front, Weiss feels the line collapsing, not from sheer force alone, but from precision. Every fallback position he had considered, compromised, every defensive advantage, anticipated. A runner stumbles toward him. Herr Hauptmann. Orders to withdraw to secondary positions. Weiss grabs the man's arm. Which route? The runner hesitates. Through the orchard, then north along the lane. No, Weiss snaps. The soldier freezes. Weiss shakes his head, breathing hard. That lane is exposed. They'll be watching it. We take the ditch line instead. The runner nods quickly and disappears. A Becker looks at Weiss. You're trusting their map again. Weiss meets his gaze. I'm trusting that they trust it. July 26, 1944. German Command Sector Oberstleutnant Friedrich Heller stands over a situation map that is already outdated. Reports flood in faster than they can be processed. breakthrough near St. Lo, armored units advancing rapidly, defensive cohesion lost in multiple sectors. Heller clenches his jaw. This is not just a breakthrough, he says. It's a collapse of structure. His adjutant nods grimly. They are moving too fast. Too efficiently. Heller looks down at the map. For years, German operations relied on speed and coordination to outmaneuver their enemies. Now, those same principles are being used against them. July 27, 1944. Normandy countryside. Lieutenant Otto Kramer moves with what remains of his platoon, retreating through a maze of fields and hedgerows. He holds the captured Allied map in one hand, his own in the other. He doesn't look at his own anymore. It's useless. Stay low, he calls out as they cross a narrow gap. Moments later, machine gun fire rakes the position they just vacated. Kramer doesn't need to guess how the enemy knew. He glances at the map. The gap is marked. As the days pass, the pattern becomes undeniable. The Allies are not just breaking through, they are exploiting every weak point identified, every opportunity mapped, every movement supported by a level of terrain understanding the Germans cannot match. Back near the remnants of his original position, Weiss pauses briefly, looking out over the scarred landscape. Smoke rises in the distance. Columns advance where none should be able to. He reaches into his coat and pulls out the American map once more. For a moment, he simply stares at it. Then he folds it carefully. This, he says quietly, almost to himself, is how they're winning. Not just with numbers, not just with firepower, but with something far less visible: preparation, detail, knowledge of the hedgerows. Once a defender's ally, are no longer enough, because the enemy has already turned them into lines on paper, lines that guide their advance with deadly precision. And as the front begins to unravel, the realization spreads: this war is no longer being decided solely by who holds the ground, but by who understands it first. August 20, 1944. Outskirts of Paris, the city lies just beyond the horizon. Hauptmann Karl Weiss stands beside a damaged staff car, staring down at yet another captured Allied map spread across the hood. The paper flutters slightly in the warm summer air, its edges worn but intact. This one is different from Normandy, denser, more intricate. Streets intersect in tight grids. Buildings are outlined block by block. Bridges, rail lines, sewer access points, even underground features, are indicated with small, precise symbols. Weiss exhales slowly. A city reduced to paper. Lieutenant Becker leans in. They can navigate this? Weiss nods. Not just navigate. Fight through it. August 21, 1944. Allied Planning Room, England. A large wall is covered with maps of Paris, not one version, dozens, different scales. Different focuses. Some highlighting transportation networks, others showing defensive strongpoints, others still detailing infrastructure, power stations, communication hubs, choke points. Lieutenant Eleanor Whitaker stands before them, pointer in hand. Primary routes are obvious, she says. Wide boulevards, direct access. But they're also predictable. She shifts the pointer to a series of narrow side streets. These are less so. An officer crosses his arms. Can armor even move through there? Whitaker nods. In some cases, yes. We've measured widths. It's tight but possible. Another officer gestures toward a marked bridge. And this? Load capacity estimated from structural analysis, she replies. Sufficient for medium armor. The room is silent for a moment, then someone says what they're all thinking: we're planning a battle for a city we haven't even entered yet. Whitaker lowers the pointer slightly. We've already entered it, she says quietly. Just not physically. August 22, 1944. German command post, Paris sector. Oberstleutnant Friedrich Heller studies reports with mounting concern: resistance movements active within the city, enemy units approaching from multiple directions, bridges potentially targeted. He looks at his map. It shows Paris as a series of main roads and landmarks, useful but incomplete. His adjutant places a captured Allied map beside it. The difference is immediate. Heller stares at it. They know every street, he says. The adjutant hesitates. Herr Oberstleutnant, more than we do. Heller doesn't respond, because it's true. August 23, 1944. Paris outskirts, Lieutenant Otto Kramer moves cautiously with a small detachment, assigned to delay advancing Allied forces. Urban combat, close quarters. Unpredictable. At least, it used to be. He unfolds the captured map again, scanning the streets ahead. They'll avoid the main boulevard, he says. A sergeant frowns. Why? It's the fastest route. Kramer shakes his head. Too obvious. Too exposed. He points to a narrow side street. They'll come through here. Covered approach. Multiple exits. The sergeant nods slowly. Then we set up there? Kramer hesitates, because he realizes something unsettling. If he can predict them using their map, then they have already considered this, already planned for resistance there, already accounted for it. He folds the map. No, he says quietly. We move again. August 24, 1944. Allied forward units entering Paris. Private Daniel Harper presses himself against a stone wall, rifle at the ready. The city feels alive, echoes of distant gunfire, shouts in the streets, the rumble of vehicles. He pulls out his map, unfolding it quickly. Every street is there, every intersection, even notes scribbled in the margins from previous briefings. Stay off Rue de Rivoli, his sergeant had warned. Too exposed. Harper checks the map. There it is, marked instead. He signals to his squad and moves down a narrower street, following a route that twists through the city like a thread. They move with confidence, not blindly guided. Inside the city, the pattern repeats. Allied units advance not just with firepower, but with awareness, choosing routes, avoiding traps, coordinating movements with a level of precision that seems almost unnatural in such chaotic terrain. German defenders, by contrast, struggle to keep up. Positions are established, then bypassed. Ambushes are set, then avoided. Fallback routes are chosen, then cut off. Back at his command post, Heller listens as reports come in. They're inside the city, multiple entry points, unable to establish consistent defensive lines. He closes his eyes briefly. A city should be a fortress. A maze. A place where defenders hold the advantage, but not like this. Not when the attacker knows the maze better than the one defending it. Weiss, now positioned within the outskirts, looks down one final time at the Allied map in his hands. Paris, every street, every path, every possibility. He folds it slowly. For years, he says quietly, we believed war was movement, speed, surprise. He looks up at the city. But what if, he continues, the real advantage is knowing where everything is before the first shot is fired. The sound of fighting echoes through the streets. The city is being taken not just by force, but by understanding. And as Paris begins to fall, the realization becomes undeniable. The Allies are not discovering the battlefield as they go, they already know it in detail. On paper, before they ever arrive. December 16, 1944. Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Snow falls in thick silence. The forest is dense, ancient, and suffocatingly quiet. Branches heavy with frost, visibility reduced to a few dozen meters in every direction. It is the kind of terrain that swallows armies whole, perfect for surprise. Oberstleutnant Friedrich Heller stands at the edge of a narrow forest road, his breath visible in the freezing air. Around him, German columns move cautiously, infantry, half-tracks, and tanks creeping forward through the snow-covered landscape. At last, something feels familiar again. Uncertainty, confusion, limited visibility. Now, Heller says quietly to his adjutant, this is terrain that favors us. The adjutant nods. Dense forest, poor roads, they won't have detailed maps here. Heller allows himself a faint, rare smile. For once, he replies, we move where they cannot see. The offensive begins before dawn and German artillery opens up, shattering the stillness of the forest. Shells crash into American positions, catching many units off guard. Communications falter. Lines break. For a moment, the war feels like it did years before. A fast, unpredictable. German forces surge forward through the Ardennes, exploiting gaps, bypassing resistance, pushing deep into Allied lines. Reports come in rapidly. Breakthrough achieved, enemy units retreating, road network lightly defended. Heller studies his map, tracing the advance. Yes, he murmurs. This is how it's done. December 17, 1944. Allied rear sector. Private Daniel Harper huddles beside a jeep, hands shaking from the cold as much as the situation. They came out of nowhere, someone says. Harper nods, pulling out his map. At first glance, it seems less useful here. The forest dominates everything, fewer landmarks, fewer clear routes. But as he looks closer, details emerge: road classifications, elevation lines, forest density markings. Even minor tracks winding through the trees. Sergeant, Harper calls out, there's another route. Here. Runs parallel to the main road. The sergeant kneels beside him. You sure? Harper points. It's marked. Narrow, but passable. The sergeant studies it for a moment, then nods. All right. We move that way. Even here, the maps still matter. December 18, 1944. German Forward Command. Heller receives new reports. At first, they are encouraging. Rapid advance continues, enemy disorganized, but then something changes, resistance encountered along secondary routes, enemy units repositioning unexpectedly, ambushes in areas believed unoccupied. Heller frowns. How are they reorganizing so quickly? He demands. His adjutant hesitates. Perhaps they know the terrain better than expected? Heller shakes his head sharply. Impossible. This forest, he stops, because the thought, once dismissed, returns. December 19, 1944. Snow-covered crossroads, Lieutenant Otto Kramer crouches behind a fallen tree, watching as American forces maneuver through the forest ahead. They are cautious, but not lost. Small units move along lesser-known paths, avoiding predictable routes, appearing in places they should not. Kramer raises his binoculars. They're using the side tracks, he mutters. A soldier beside him nods. Ones we barely knew existed. Kramer lowers the binoculars slowly. They knew. Back on the Allied side, the response is taking shape. In command tents, maps are spread across every available surface. Officers trace movements, identify choke points, redirect units. The forest, once a barrier, becomes a network. A system, something to be navigated. December 20, 1944. Allied command briefing. Captain Harold Green stands before a group of officers, his map marked with fresh annotations. The Germans are advancing along major roadways, he explains. Predictable. Necessary for armor. He points to several narrow routes cutting through the forest. These paths, less obvious, but they give us mobility. We use them to flank, delay, disrupt. An officer nods. And the terrain data? Green taps the map, still valid. Even here, even now, December 21, 1944. German command post. Heller stares down at his map once more. It hasn't changed, but the situation has. What began as surprise is becoming resistance. What felt like control is slipping into friction. They're adapting too quickly, his adjutant says. Heller nods slowly. Yes, he replies. Because they're not starting from nothing. He looks up, eyes narrowing. They already understand this ground. Back in the forest, Weiss, now reassigned to support defensive operations, moves cautiously through the snow. The war has shifted again. What was once an advantage is fading. He pauses, listening, distant movement, voices. He reaches into his coat, pulling out the now familiar Allied map. Even here, in the dense Ardennes, it offers clarity. Paths, contours, options. He folds it carefully. No matter where we fight, he says quietly, they arrive prepared. The snow continues to fall. The forest remains vast and unforgiving, but the illusion that there is anywhere left unmapped is beginning to disappear. March 7, 1945. Remagen, Germany. The Rhine glistens under a pale sky, cold. Wide. Final of 4 years, it has stood as a natural barrier, Germany's last great defensive line in the west. Bridges have been destroyed across its length to slow the Allied advance, all but one. Hauptmann Karl Weiss stands on the eastern bank, staring at the Ludendorff Bridge, still standing, damaged, wired with explosives, but intact. How is it still there? Becker asks, disbelief in his voice. Weiss doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulls out the Allied map. This one is newer. War-worn. Edges soften from constant handling, but the detail remains. The bridge is there, not just the bridge, but the approaches, the surrounding terrain, the roads leading to it, even elevation lines showing the slopes on either side of the river. Weiss exhales slowly. They knew it mattered. He says, hours earlier, American forces had reached the bridge unexpectedly fast, not by chance, not by wandering, but by movement guided along routes, carefully chosen routes that avoided strongpoints, exploited gaps, and led directly to this critical crossing. Private Daniel Harper runs across the bridge, boots pounding against the steel structure. Gunfire cracks around him. The air is filled with smoke and tension as engineers work frantically to cut demolition wires. Move! Move, someone shouts. Harper doesn't look down. He keeps moving forward, because the map in his pocket had already told him this bridge was the key. March 7, 1945. German Command Sector. Oberstleutnant Friedrich Heller listens as the report is delivered. American forces have crossed the Rhine at Remagen. The room goes silent. That is not possible. Someone says, the bridge, still standing. The adjutant confirms. Heller closes his eyes briefly for a moment. The weight of years presses down on him. All bridges were to be destroyed. He says quietly, yes, Herr Oberstleutnant. But they reached it before demolition could be completed. Heller opens his eyes, and they reached it, he continues, because they knew exactly how to get there. March 8, 1945. Eastern bank of the Rhine. Lieutenant Otto Kramer watches from a concealed position as Allied forces pour across the river, not cautiously, not hesitantly, but with momentum. Bridges are built. Pontoon crossings established. Supply lines extended. IT is not chaos, IT is continuation. Kramer looks down at his own map, outdated, incomplete. He doesn't even bother unfolding the captured Allied one this time. He already knows what it will show, everything back on the western side. Captain Harold Green studies the latest operational maps. The Rhine is no longer a boundary, IT is a line already crossed. He traces the next phase with his finger. From here, he says, we push inward. Industrial zones, transportation hubs, everything connected. An officer nods. And the mapping? Green doesn't look up, already done. March 10, 1945. German retreat. Weiss moves with a dwindling group of soldiers through shattered towns and open countryside. There is no clear front anymore, only movement, withdrawal, delayed. He pauses briefly, leaning against a broken wall, and pulls out the Allied map one last time. Germany, roads, rivers, towns, all laid out with the same precision he first saw in Normandy. He studies it in silence. For a moment, the war feels distant. Reduced to lines and symbols, then the sound of engines returns, pulling him back. He folds the map slowly. For them, he says quietly, this was never unknown. Across the collapsing front, the pattern repeats. Allied forces move with coordination that seems almost effortless. They bypass resistance, seize crossings, cut off retreats, not perfectly and not without loss, but with a consistency that cannot be ignored, because every movement is supported by something deeper than instinct, something built long before the first shot. Heller stands in what remains of his command post, the walls cracked, the windows shattered. He looks down at the Allied map spread before him, not with anger, not even with frustration, but with understanding. This, he says quietly, is what defeated us. His adjutant says nothing, because there is nothing to argue. The Rhine has been crossed, the last natural barrier broken, and beyond it, there is no mystery left. No hidden ground. No unseen path, only territory already studied, already mapped, already understood. Weiss looks once more toward the east, toward what remains of Germany, then he turns and continues moving. Behind him, the war he once knew, built on maneuver, surprise, and uncertainty, has been replaced by something else, something quieter, but far more decisive. A war where the battlefield itself had been captured long before the fighting began. April 20, 1945. Near Leipzig, Germany, the war has lost its shape. There are no clear front lines anymore, only fragments. Pockets of resistance scattered across a collapsing landscape. Columns moving in different directions. Orders arriving too late, or not at all. Hauptmann Karl Weiss walks along a shattered roadway, boots crunching over broken glass and debris. The towns they pass through are hollowed, doors hanging open, windows blown out, streets abandoned or filled with civilians moving in silence. He no longer checks for landmarks. He checks for movement ahead. A burned-out sign leans crookedly at the edge of the road. The name is barely legible. Weiss doesn't recognize it, but he doesn't need to, because he already knows where he is, not from memory or from the map. He stops and pulls it out again. The Allied map, creased, dirt-stained, edges frayed from weeks of use. Germany, laid out in precise detail. He traces the road with his finger. This village, he says quietly to Becker, who walks beside him, was never important to us. Becker glances at the map. It is to them. Weiss nods, because it connects. Another road. Another town. Another route of advance. Nothing exists in isolation on this map, everything is part of a system. April 21, 1945. Allied forward column. Private Daniel Harper rides in the back of a truck, rifle resting across his knees as the convoy moves steadily forward. No hesitation. No confusion. The road ahead is known. He unfolds his map briefly, checking their route. Every turn is marked, every bridge accounted for, even notes updated from recent reconnaissance are penciled into the margins. Road damage here, his sergeant calls out, pointing ahead. Harper glances down, already marked. They slow, adjust, and continue without stopping. It feels less like advancing into enemy territory and more like following instructions. April 22, 1945. German command remnants. Oberstleutnant Friedrich Heller stands in a dimly lit room, what remains of his command staff gathered around him. There are fewer reports now, fewer units to report. He looks down at his own map. It has become meaningless. Positions marked days ago are already gone. Units no longer exist where they are supposed to be. Lines have dissolved. Then he looks at the Allied map beside it. Still relevant, still accurate, even now. He runs a hand across it slowly. They don't need to guess. He says. His adjutant nods weakly. No, Herr Oberstleutnant. Heller exhales. We are reacting to a world that has already been defined. April 23, 1945. Edge of a forest road. Lieutenant Otto Kramer crouches beside a small group of soldiers, watching as Allied vehicles move along a distant ridge. They don't slow down. One of the men whispers. Kramer shakes his head. because they don't need to. He looks at the terrain around them, every defensive position they might choose, every fallback route, he can already see it, not with his eyes, but in his mind, shaped by the map he has studied so many times, and if he can see it, then so can they. He closes his eyes briefly. For years, war had been about uncertainty, a fog of war, the unknown. Now, that fog is gone. At least for one side. April 24, 1945. Allied command briefing. Captain Harold Green stands before a smaller group now. The scale of operations has shifted. The end is near, but the maps are still there, still being updated, still being used. Urban centers ahead, he says, pointing to a cluster of marked cities. Infrastructure targets, communication nodes, all identified. An officer leans back slightly. At this point, is it even necessary? Green pauses, then he answers, it's always necessary. Because even in the final days, precision matters. Back on the road, Weiss slows his pace, the sound of distant artillery rolls faintly across the horizon. He looks down at the map one last time, not with frustration, not with anger, but with something else, understanding. For them, he says quietly, this war was never fought blindly. Becker doesn't respond, because there is nothing left to say. Around them, the remnants of the German army continue to move, retreating, regrouping, dissolving, but the pattern remains. Allied forces advance along paths already chosen, already known, already understood. Weiss folds the map carefully and places it back inside his coat, not as a tool anymore, but as a reminder. Of what changed, of what decided everything. The war is almost over, but the lesson remains. It was not just fought with weapons, it was fought with knowledge, and in that battle, one side had already seen the field long before the other ever stepped onto it. May 2, 1945. Outskirts of Berlin, Germany, the city burns in the distance, smoke rises in thick columns, darkening the sky as the sound of artillery echoes without pause. Buildings crumble. Streets vanish beneath rubble. What remains of Berlin is no longer a city in the traditional sense, it is a battlefield reduced to fragments. Hauptmann Karl Weiss stands at the edge of a shattered boulevard, his uniform worn, his posture heavier than it once was. There are no more positions to hold. No more lines to defend, only survival. Beside him, Lieutenant Becker watches silently as distant figures move through the ruins, Soviet troops advancing from one block to the next, clearing what remains. Is it over? Becker asks quietly. Weiss doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he reaches into his coat one final time. The map of the Allied map. It is barely intact now, edges torn, creases deep, stains from mud, rain, and time covering its surface. But the details are still there. Berlin, every major street, rail lines, industrial districts, even annotations marking key structures. Weiss stares at it for a long moment. This was done before they arrived, he says finally. Becker nods faintly. Before any of them. Weiss exhales. For them, this place, he gestures toward the ruined city, was never unknown. Years earlier, before Normandy, before the Ardennes, before the Rhine, the work had already begun. In quiet rooms far from the front, men and women had studied Europe piece by piece, aerial photographs layered over old surveys, civilian records cross-referenced with reconnaissance data, every road traced, every village catalogued, every landscape broken down into information that could be used, not in theory, but in war. May 3, 1945. Allied Command Sector, Captain Harold Green stands over a final set of maps. Berlin is marked, routes completed, objectives achieved. He places his hand on the table, looking down at the accumulated work, years of effort reduced to sheets of paper now worn from USE. An officer nearby speaks quietly. Hard to believe it all led here. Green nods. It didn't just lead here, he says. It made this possible. Private Daniel Harper walks through the outskirts of the city, rifle lowered slightly as resistance fades. He pauses, pulling out his map one last time. Berlin. Now he compares it to what he sees around him. Some streets no longer exist, some buildings are gone, but enough remains, enough for orientation, enough to move forward without hesitation. He folds it slowly. For months, it has guided him. Now, he no longer needs it. May 4, 1945. German command remnants. Oberstleutnant Friedrich Heller sits alone in what remains of a command room. The war, for all practical purposes, is finished. He looks down at the Allied map in front of him, not as an enemy document anymore, but as something else. A record. A representation of a different kind of warfare. We thought speed would win, he says quietly to no one. We thought surprise would carry us. His hand rests on the map, but they removed uncertainty. Outside, the sounds of battle are fading, not abruptly but steadily like a storm passing. Weiss folds the map one final time, carefully, deliberately. He does not discard it. He keeps it, because it represents something he cannot ignore. Not defeat alone, but how that defeat came. For years, he says quietly, almost to himself, we fought the enemy in front of us. He looks out toward the ruined city. They fought the ground beneath us. The camera of history pulls back across Europe, from the hedgerows of Normandy, to the forests of the Ardennes, to the bridges of the Rhine, to the streets of Berlin. The same pattern remains, the same unseen advantage, maps that were not just tools, but weapons, not fired, not explosive, but decisive, because they turned the unknown into the known, the uncertain into the planned, the battlefield into something already understood. May 8, 1945. Europe, the war ends, but the lesson does not die. In every future conflict, in every plan, every operation, every movement, the importance of understanding the terrain before the battle begins will remain, not as theory, but as proven fact. Weiss stands still for a moment longer, then he turns and walks away. Behind him, the map remains folded in his coat. A quiet reminder that long before the first shot was fired, the battlefield had already been drawn.